Welcome to Tax Tips Tuesdays with Patrick and Rains, a local accounting firm. In the studio with me is Tim and Chris, and on the phone is Mark. Hello, gentlemen. How are you today?
We're good.
I'm doing great.
Be with you.
Glad to hear, gentlemen. Tell us about Patrick and Rains CPAs.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, Patrick and Rains, we're a local CPA firm here at 4029 Atlantic Boulevard in Jacksonville. We work with a wide variety of clients. You can say over the last 3 decades or so that we've been in business, we've had the opportunity to touch multiple sectors and industries in private, government, as well as not-for-profit organizations throughout the Gulf Coast and beyond. Some of our favorites are the construction, healthcare and medical, manufacturing and distribution, transportation logistics, not-for-profit organizations, and restaurant and hospitalities. So if you have a need, you're looking for that personal attention, a team of great accounting folks to help you understand your financial situation, feel free to reach out to us. We'll help you make sense of the numbers so that you can prepare for your future. We here at P&R, we like to do the preparation advice and provide results.
And what number can we contact you at?
904-396-5400.
All right, so let's get started. What is today's topic?
This week, we would like to discuss one of the areas we focus on as a firm, clergy taxes. Next week, we can discuss not-for-profit groups, good record keeping in general, which comes in handy when filing your taxes and keeping an eye on your financial well-being.
Churches and taxes have a very long history, although the churches haven't paid taxes as such in the United States since 1776. They weren't officially recognized in law until 1894. Churches generally don't pay property taxes in Florida. There are some states that do. And donations to any church that's qualified would be tax deductible for the donor, assuming they itemize. Most churches do not withhold Social Security and Medicare tax for their ministers because they are deemed to be self-employed for Medicare and Social Security purposes. So it's up to the individual clergy to take care of estimated tax payments to cover those taxes as self-employment. There's some details in publication 1828 on irs.gov, which has about 40 pages that talk about churches and their relationship to their pastors.
So keep in mind that clergy, they have different tax requirements. So their tax returns are not really going to look like other people. So for the ministers, the priests, the pastors, the rabbis, and other religious leaders, we tried to put together a quick list just to kind of show you some things you can keep in mind so tax time's not quite such a headache.
The wages on the W-2, for example, are subject to ordinary income tax and self-employment tax. So a clergy member, you'll still see a W-2, but Social Security and Medicare taxes in most cases should not be withheld. However, you as an individual still need to pay Social Security and Medicare tax by filing Form 1040 Self-Employment, which is Schedule SE. Clergy members have the option to forego social assistance such as Social Security and Medicare tax, but this election is made by filing Form 4361 within the first 2 years of becoming ordained. Once this has been filed and accepted by the IRS, the clergy member would only be subject to ordinary income tax for the wages and or self-employment tax that they have, self-employment income. The election cannot be rescinded.
So ministers are both employees and self-employed?
Yeah, at the same time. So think of ministers as being dual status. Most are considered employees by their churches for income tax purposes, but they are all considered self-employed for Social Security purposes. Whether a minister inside your church is deemed an employee or independent contractor, that's going to be dependent upon how much control the church or congregation has over the pastor. If a minister is classified as an employee, they used to be limited in order to be able to claim some unreimbursed business expenses. They did this over on Schedule A of the itemized deductions. But now after TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, those employees deductions are no longer deductible. So setting up what we call an accountable reimbursement policy is the best method for claiming or reimbursing professional business expenses for ministers who are classified as employees.
So what is an accountable plan?
An accountable plan must be put in place by the employing church in order for the ministers to receive tax-free reimbursements for their job-related out-of-pocket expenses. Prior to 2017, when the tax reform bill passed, it was the minister's responsibility to take care of their unreimbursed expenses as itemized deductions on their Schedule A. But this law eliminated that option. So therefore, we want the church to bear the responsibility of ensuring that the compensation is structured so that the ministers get their expenses reimbursed for the best tax advantage. By offering an accountable plan, which generally should be in writing, the church can determine the items for which the minister can receive these tax-free reimbursements, usually general business expenses. They can include things like books, mileage, lodging, meals, continuing education, etc. However, it's critical that the church has a plan documented with these items that are eligible so that there's good accountability and not deal with it on a case-by-case scenario.
What if the church doesn't have an accountable plan and the clergy is considered self-employed?
Ministers can still deduct their professional and business expenses on IRS Schedule C if they are classified as an independent contractor, which means they're self-employed. Schedule C forms are only used by independent contractors and sole proprietors to account for the net profits and losses at the end of the tax year. As a member of the clergy, you have dual status and are obligated to pay estimated tax payments as if you were an independent contractor. This means that you are eligible to use a Schedule C form to report income earned and expenses incurred outside your regular church employment, such as weddings, funerals, speaking engagements. It is extremely important to track all of your costs associated to these outside engagements to reduce your taxable income. If you are deemed an employee of your church, you cannot elect to be self-employed.
All right. If you are just tuning in, this is Tax Tips Tuesdays with Patrick and Rains. Here in the studio are Tim and Chris, and Mark is via phone. And today's topic is, Tim?
Clergy taxes.
All right, so we're moving right along. What are the major tax deductions for ministers?
Well, there's a couple of them. The biggest one of the big ones is travel. So work-related transportation, such as your trips back and forth to a hospital or a nursing home, to visit parishioners. This can be a major expense for a minister or anybody self-employed, really. The most important thing to remember is that to faithfully document every trip. To claim this deduction reimbursement, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind, as well as your mileage log. The date, the place that you travel to, and jot down the business purpose. Occasionally people write down, what the relationship to the individuals they're meeting with, what they're talking about, as well as the mileage. Also, it's a good idea to keep track of the total mileage for the vehicle, so the beginning odometer reading and the ending odometer reading for the whole year. You can do this a couple different ways. A lot of people will use like a MapQuest or Google Maps or just something to show the route. There's also apps that do it, such as MileIQ. But keep in mind that, quote, commuting miles, this is the distance between the minister's residence and the church, or if they're working on another not-for-profit, the distance between their home and, quote, the church. That is not a tax-deductible expense. So if the church actually reimburses a minister for those, quote, commuting miles, then that does need to be included in their W-2.
Meals and entertainment would be another item that many people come up with, but entertainment, for all intents and purposes, has been eliminated with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Entertainment such as having a business meal does qualify, however, so if you're entertaining a parishioner over lunch or trying to get a prospective volunteer to join with you or something, those would qualify. But you cannot deduct a meal just because you're out and about for the day. It would only be if you're overnight, if it's by yourself. There's some pretty strict rules by the IRS in Publication 463 if you want to look at more details. But generally, a meal can be deducted or reimbursed by the church if there's a business relationship and the purpose can be shown by the minister to be related to their business purpose. The rules keep changing. As recently as 2021, there's been another change in the area for deduction of meals. So you need to be very cognizant of the recent rulings and pronouncements that come out related to what an employee can deduct or be reimbursed for, and what can be claimed under Schedule C if you're going to be self-employed.
Another possible deduction is for clothing. Vestments, robes, and uniforms that are usually not worn outside of your ministry duties can be ministerial deductions. Something to note is that ordinary street clothes or suits are not deductible as they can be worn for other events outside of the ministry.
A really good point there, Chris. Another one is any sort of fees, dues, or subscriptions, such as seminar fees, dues to professional organizations or societies, maybe subscriptions to professional journals or subscriptions to religious publications. But also keep in mind that charitable contributions to your church does not qualify as a tax-deductible, quote, business deduction on Schedule C. These items are still just your regular charitable deductions over on Schedule A.
Another one related to that is resource books. If you need a concordance, a theological dictionary, religious books, publications, and anything that you put in your professional library, and that would include online services that you would have in this regard, are all eligible business deductions to be reimbursed or deducted on the Schedule C.
Also, educational expenses such as tuition, books, supplies, correspondence courses can be ministerial deductions if the education is required by your employer, such as the church, law, regulation to keep your job. It also improves and maintains your skills for that job, and education towards a professional degree is generally not deductible unless the employing church has a formal tuition reimbursement plan.
And last but certainly not least, one of the greatest minister tax deductions, the housing allowance.
Yes, this is the one that trips up many, many people because it is rather complex, but it is the greatest tax benefit to a minister. It's very much misunderstood because of its complexity. Basically, you set aside a percentage or a dollar amount of the minister's compensation, so it's designated in advance of the expenses being incurred for housing from the minister's employing church. It's very beneficial for ministers because the allowance for housing is excluded from federal income tax, although it's not exempt from the minister's self-employment or Social Security Medicare.
The pastor housing is something that is commonly misunderstood. Many think it is exempt from all taxes, like Mark said. However, it is only exempt from the income tax. So it's still subject to the Social Security and Medicare tax, which is commonly called FICA, if the exemption has not previously been filed. Furthermore, you must be sure to properly calculate your housing allowance. At the end of the year, if your housing allowance exceeds your allowable housing expenses, the difference must be reallocated to income and subject to the income taxes. This can be tricky once your house is paid off or if you own multiple homes. Make sure that you have enough housing expenses to offset your housing allowance. If you don't have enough expenses, your excess allowance is considered income and is subject to ordinary income tax. Your housing expenses also cannot exceed the fair rental value of your home, including furnishings and utilities.
Wow, what great information you're sharing. I'm sure the pastors and others that are a part of ministry are tuning in and getting this great info. Are there any other comments before next week's program?
Well, anytime that you're looking at tax deductions, documentation is very important. So be sure and gather all of your information related to business expenses as well as income in one email or package to send to your CPA or tax preparer. Sending it in piecemeal is a little bit like going to the store and buying one brick at a time to build a house. It's much easier to load it all up and bring it in at one time. Much easier for us because it simplifies the process and keeps your tax bill down, tax preparation bill down, and we'll spend less time doing that. Whenever possible, try to provide summaries. Don't list all of the individual entertainment expenses, but total the entertainment together or meals or whatever it may be, so that's outlined in the work papers that you may provide supporting documents, but we don't have to wade through that. If we can provide you an organizer, that helps the schedules be more consolidated, clear for you, and remind you of things that you might miss. It'll reduce the record-keeping time for us in preparing the tax return.
Yeah, I really encourage folks to use technology as much as they can, whether it's an app or another solution, just to keep things organized. This is really going to prevent headaches for you and your tax preparer when it becomes tax time. And believe it or not, many people will forget about income or forget about deductions that they had throughout the year. So getting everything streamlined and your mileage and your receipt tracking, maybe QBO, which is QuickBooks Online, Xero, MileIQ, Bill.com, Receipt Bank, there's a ton of them out there. Helps you get everything recorded, and that way it comes tax time, it's all stored electronically if you ever get audited, and it just makes tax time so much easier.
Be careful of what you read on the internet. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, because everybody is an expert. Use the IRS website. It is easy to navigate and approachable to those that don't read the Internal Revenue Code for a living. Don't take advice from friends, family, or coworkers unless they are tax practitioners such as enrolled agents, certified public accountants, or tax attorneys.
I also encourage everyone to, you can Google and find good local experts, read their reviews, look at their credentials, and join their monthly newsletter or their podcast. This is a great way to get good information, especially if you're strapped for cash, but you still want access to good, helpful tax information.
All right, this has been another edition of Tax Tips Tuesdays with Patrick and Rains CPAs. And Tim, tell us where you're located, how to reach you, your website info.
Yeah, we are at 4029 Atlantic Boulevard, which is here in the St. Nicholas area in the south side of Jacksonville, just south of downtown. Our website is www.cpasite.com, just like cpasite.com.
All right. Thank you, Tim, Mark, and Chris for being a part of today's Tax Tips Tuesday.
And thank you for having us.
Awesome. Thanks for having us back.
You're welcome. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in for another session of Tax Tips Tuesdays right here on Pure 103.7 FM, AM 1320, Jacksonville's Christian station.